Should say, oh, there we go. And we are live.
All right.
We'll give it 1 second here since it's not quite 8 o'clock.
No problem.
What team is that, by the way? I can't tell what you have on your hat.
It's a Mariners hat, dude.
Oh, it's Mariners. Wait,
Yeah.
is that their new logo? I don't...
No, that's their old one. This is the one that they.
Oh, okay, that's the one I'm used to. Yeah.
It's usually the compass. This is the one that they wore when the team first started. So the Seattle Pilots moved to Milwaukee and became the Brewers, and this is the Brewers color scheme that you might recognize. But it was also the Pilots color scheme.
Nice.
So when the Mariners first started, they used the old school color scheme for the team until like the mid '90s when they changed it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've never even seen that old one. So
yeah, I love that logo.
That's awesome. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. For anyone that's jumping on, I have with me today Kevin Murphey, who I actually went to Gonzaga with. I have another Gonzaga grad on. And he also got his master's in stats. And he has a pretty cool journey, so I'm excited to interview him. So first of all, thanks for joining, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. And Kevin is from Seattle. And so we're gonna go ahead and get started. The first question I have for you is to back up, and I kind of start this way with everyone, is when you were a kid, were you interested in math at that time, or were you good at math, or was that kind of later on in life?
I've always been good at math. Whether or not I knew I was good at math, that's another question, but I've always been pretty good at math. I think there were like 3 events in my life that convinced me that I wanted to do math for a living. I think the first one was like when I was a kid, I collected baseball cards like crazy. And for me, the part of the baseball cards that I really loved was the back of the cards, looking at the back of the cards and figuring out what made a good player, why, certain players were all-stars and other players weren't very good. And so I would look at the back of cards and just read the stats over and over and over again. And I remember probably when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, having a spreadsheet where I would like just type out the stats into a spreadsheet because I was learning how to use a spreadsheet. So, baseball is probably one of the biggest reasons I got into math the way I did.
Interesting.
I also, I think one of the other things that kind of convinced me when I was a kid was doing the math time tests. When I was in like 1st grade, I would just crank through the time tests.
Did you guys have those tests where it was timed and then you had to go as fast as you could through like multiplication tables?
Yeah, well, it started with addition and then subtraction and then multiplication. And I ended up getting through division before I think the end of my 2nd grade year.
Nice.
It was just one of those things that just always clicked with me. And that kind of allowed me to know that I was good at it. It didn't kind of really click to me how kind of different that was for other people until I got to high school and took calculus my senior year. It really clicked to me that I was skilled in math. Again, I would never be one to call myself smart. I just don't necessarily see myself that way. I'm sure a lot of other people I know that I respect their intelligence are the same way. But for me, when I got to high school and I took calculus, I had a math teacher that kind of took an interest in me and kind of wanted to push me as hard as he could. So he would always, give me extra challenge problems and give me, extra homework and stuff like that. And, he, one time I was hanging out after class and he kind of pulled me aside and asked me what I was doing, in college, what I was going to study. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I just said, I don't really know. And he was like, well, why don't you think about math? And sure enough, that's what pretty much made me decide to major in mathematics. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember like the times tables in elementary school though. Like for us, I think we had like time tests, and I remember I was actually really fast at those. And then I think I got a record in one of our classes on the multiplication. Then for some reason I struggled in math for like a couple years after that, and then it clicked for me after like I think it was algebra 1 when it really started clicking, or geometry or something. And then it was like later on it really clicked for me. But it was funny because I was like good initially and then I really struggled for a while.
Yeah, I think my biggest struggle, like in elementary math, was adding and subtracting fractions. I think that drove me nuts.
Yeah, yeah. Finding
Um,
the common denominator and all that.
yeah, for some reason, I just couldn't. That didn't grok with me, and so it
Yeah,
took me a while to be able to, figure that out. But once I did, I was off to the races. Yes.
that's awesome. So then after that, you were encouraged to major in math. You ended up going to Gonzaga. What kind of motivated you to go over to Spokane to Gonzaga?
There were a few things really. The first one being my sister was there. I've
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm pretty close with my family, and my sister had started at UW and didn't University of Washington, and she didn't love kind of the big school atmosphere and just feeling like a number. She ended up taking some time off, tried another school. I don't remember what the other school was, but ended up one summer going to visit her friends that were at Gonzaga in Spokane, and realized how much she loved that school. And so, similarly, when I started my kind of college search, there were a couple of, like big names that I wanted to check out, but really I made one college visit and I went and visited Gonzaga and visited my sister and just kind of fell in love with the school and the community. And, just the kind of vibe of that town. It's a weird place to really enjoy being, especially when you're at that age, because it doesn't have much
That's
of a
kind of why I
nightlife.
was asking because like I love Spokane and I know a lot of people that do, but it's also kind of one of those small town places, and I don't think of people that are going into college excited to go to Spokane. But I'm always fascinated why people like it.
I have a love-hate relationship with Spokane. I hate that I love it.
Yes.
I don't think I want to live there now, as a young professional. Seattle's the right place for me, with
Yeah.
what I'm trying to do. But when I was in college, I think it was the perfect place to get into trouble, but not too much trouble. Um,
There you go.
it was that small town feel, but it's a big city. It
Yeah.
reminded me. I grew up. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I lived there until I was 12, and it reminded me a lot of Milwaukee, a big city that didn't feel huge.
Yep.
So that was one of the big reasons. But the other things for me were size of school. I like uh, being at a smaller school. I felt like it gave me a higher quality of education in my kind of in my like non-major classes, in my elective classes, if you will. I felt like I was able to get a better depth of education from the instructor, from the professor, or whoever that might be, than some of my friends that went to bigger schools. I think in your upper
Just
division
because of
courses.
like class size and being able to like communicate with other people in class, or what made it better, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think class size and time with the instructor. I still to this day keep in touch with a few of my professors from non-math classes at Gonzaga.
That's cool.
It's an experience that you don't really get at a bigger state school where there's a couple hundred kids in your math, your intro to stats class, or your history class or whatever. Gonzaga just kind of gave me that opportunity to kind of get pushed by my teachers. I have a bit of a complacency issue when I find things to be easy. I don't put a lot of effort into them. And as a result, I don't think I would have been as nearly as successful in my academic pursuits if it wasn't for getting pushed by teachers.
That's awesome. And then also, I know you worked at the math lab. So did I. We were both math tutors there. Give people a sense of like how, like, with working in the math lab, did that help your understanding of certain things? And then also, has that helped you going forward in any way?
Yeah, I've been a tutor pretty much since my senior year of high school when I had a friend ask me to help her out with calculus. You know, I've kind of found that one of the best things a person can do for learning math is to try to teach it to someone else.
Yep.
Like once you think you understand it, try to teach it to someone else and then realize that you have no idea why. And that's the trick to remember in math, especially, is that knowing what to do is great. Knowing why you need to do it is even better. Math people tend to look at it as a very formulaic type pursuit. I think most of us that I know you probably have the same feeling. I know most of us that graduated, around that same time at Gonzaga probably have that same feeling that it's a really creative pursuit. It is
It
not
is.
a kind of regulated, regimented way of solving problems. There's not.
Well, you know what? You know what's interesting about that is I was talking to Kim Logan, and she was a double major in math and art, and she actually said she felt like the math was more of a creative pursuit than art was. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm not an artist. I play a guitar, and that's about as far as I go. But I, I in tutoring, this is something that I always have told my students. I tutored after college quite a bit. And one of the things that I always tell my students is that get out of this box of thinking that you just because you can't memorize a formula means you can't solve the problem. Because if you're creative, as long as you stay within the bounds of the rules, or to kind of make the analogy back to art, as long as you stay on the piece of paper, people are going to see what you're doing. People are going to see what you're trying to accomplish, and we're going to be able to determine, whether or not this is good art or bad art, or good math or bad math. I think that's one of the massive failings in the way we teach mathematics, is that we teach it formulaic. We say memorize the quadratic formula, but don't memorize how to get to it, or don't, experiment with different ways to get to that formula. And I think that's one of the struggles that people run into when they're trying to learn math.
I would agree with you. I think a lot of people that don't like math tend to think like, oh, I just hate how there's so many formulas and I don't understand it. And that is based on the formulaic approach. But I feel like, quadratic formula, for example, there's multiple ways you can prove that. And I think teaching different ways of getting at that, like that's what's exciting, is like, how would you get to this? How would you get to this answer? Or even something different like that you could use. And I think that's what's fun about it.
Yeah, I think it was at Gonzaga that I learned how many different ways there are to prove that 3/3 equals 1. Like you can do it with limit theory, and you can do it with just, adding 1/3 plus 0.3 repeated all, 3 times. But, I think at some point we were in the math lab, all of us just hanging out because that's what cool kids did.
Of course.
And I think we kind of came up with like 50 different ways that we had seen to prove that. And I think that's the thing that most people don't get to see about math that causes people to feel like it's not a very creative pursuit. Especially as you get to higher levels of math, it is basically all just making stuff up and trying to prove it.
Yep. No, exactly. I mean, I totally agree. And so, then you tutored at Gonzaga, you got your degree, and then after that, give us an idea of kind of what you did after school, and then why after that you decided to go get your master's.
So I didn't do much after school. It was fun.
That's a good thing.
So
you and I talked about that a little bit. That's something that I regretted.
Yeah. So after college, I went home. I dealt with some health issues while I was at Gonzaga, so I ended up taking 5 years. I injured my back when I was in high school. So after Gonzaga, I spent about 1.5 years trying to get my health in order, and kind of, I had a back surgery, I had a hip surgery, and was just trying to get my body not hurting as much. It was kind of one of the things that really, I think, was a drag on my experience in college, although it didn't stop me from having too much fun. But I struggled with that health, and couldn't walk necessarily comfortably every day, and couldn't sit in class every day. And so I decided to get my health in order. And so I took about 1 year off, and then I started working as a QA tester at a software company. That work was not a ton of fun for me, but it was good to get experience in that world. I think QA testing takes a very specific type A personality, and I don't necessarily think that's who I am. I did good work, but I didn't necessarily like the kind of regimented structure of how I needed to go about to do it. It didn't give me a lot of room for creativity or freedom of thought. And so I did that for about 1 year and tried to figure out what the heck I wanted to do with my life. And, sometime within that year, I took the first actuary exam. I passed that one, and that's a point of pride for me, because on that, the time I passed it, I took it twice. The first time I didn't study and I didn't pass it. The second time I studied a little bit and I ended up passing it, and one of the times that it had the lowest pass rate ever. And I was like, yes.
That's awesome.
And I felt so righteous about that. I was like, yes, I am.
And this
smart.
This is the probability one, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And I took some time thinking about pursuing that path and realized that it just wasn't for me.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, I never really asked you about this, but I remember you and I being in the math lab at one point. This was, I think, our senior year, and I was talking to you, and I know you were really thinking about the actuarial route. And I'm curious because you did pass that exam. I'm curious what kind of veered you away toward something else.
the glib answer is I didn't want to work for the enemy. Uh,
The insurance world,
yeah. But realistically, like that is a little bit of truth. You know,
totally.
with my health issues, I had to deal a lot with insurance companies, and
Yep.
I did not have a lot of great experiences. And as a result, I didn't want to be that guy that would create the model that would say I was uninsurable. And so as a result, I realized that, okay, that's a path that's still open to me that I could always go back down if I choose to.
Right.
You know, I've passed that first exam, and if my results expire, then I can just pass it again if that's what I want to do. But I thought, you know, there has to be another option out there for me. So I did a lot of research into what I could do with a math degree. And especially at the time, 2008, it was still during the kind of economic collapse, especially in Seattle, where it never really hit fully. But a lot of the people that had 10, 15 years of experience were taking entry level jobs when they didn't have one. And so as a result, a
Yeah, because
person
we
like,
we really graduated right when it hit the
yeah,
economy pretty bad.
and as a result, because I was educated in math, there wasn't a ton of positions open at the time because of that recession and experienced people taking entry level jobs. So I figured I would try to find a way to wait it out. And I applied to a whole bunch of grad schools and ended up going to one of them.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
by the way, everyone who's watching, actuaries aren't that evil. I'm an actuary. I mean, you could consider me evil, but there's multiple routes you can go.
It's not evil. It's just not for me. Right. Like
No, I know.
it's,
I'm kidding.
it's one of
Totally.
those things that like I look at them as the enemy because I've had to deal with insurance companies a lot, but I
Yeah.
don't think the people that work for them are, you know, like the
So, well, I
people
mean,
that,
yeah, insurance it's a whole interesting topic. It's kind of I almost view it as a necessary evil in society, and there's so many ways you can do it too. I mean, obviously that's why there's always, you got Republicans and Democrats debating about it all the time because it affects everyone's life, and there really are multiple ways it can be done. I think what's fun about being an actuary is it's all a cost bucketing game. So no matter what the law is, whether we have liberal politicians, whether we have conservative politicians, you have to figure out how is this going to work. And it's kind of crazy though, because like there is some. I mean, insurance has both positives and negatives to it, and it's a crazy game. So
well, and the thing that I think always helped me, you know, in dealing with insurance companies is that most of the people want to help you,
yeah,
right? It's there are a very few people at the very top of the food chain that are totally driven by profit, and everybody else is driven by how can we do the best for the people that we serve. And
exactly.
and that's the part that maybe my 22-year-old, 23-year-old self didn't recognize.
So, okay, so let's go into you decided to go get your master's in stats. This is after the QA job. And
Yeah.
did you get to a point where you were kind of tired of that? You took the actuarial exam, you decided insurance was evil, and then you're like, let's go get my master's, or were you still doing the QA stuff at the time?
So I did the QA stuff until about a year before I went to grad school. So I did that for about a year and a half, and I was living with my parents at the time, so I was saving a lot of money, and so I had a couple of grand saved up. You know, I probably had about $10,000 saved up, and I was like, you know what, I can make this last a year, and I took a year off.
That's
In that
awesome.
year taking off, I had already taken the GREs and gotten pretty good grades. I don't remember exactly what I scored, but I remember it was better than my SAT, which I wore as a badge of pride. Um,
Nice.
the A lot of the schools I applied for didn't require the subject exam,
Yep.
so I didn't take that right away. I instead applied to the ones that didn't require the subject exam first, and I applied to I think something like 12 to 18 grad schools in the course of doing the initial GRE, starting to apply, and then taking the subject matter test, and then continuing to apply.
That is a
Um,
ton of grad schools.
yeah, well, I took 3 years off, and I told you this when we kind of spoke the other day, but I didn't really excel in college. I did well enough, and I kind of stunned a few of our professors in college with how well I did on the math subject exam in college to
Yep.
graduate.
This is for everyone who's watching. We had to take this exam at the end in our comprehensive class. Like all the math majors had to take it, and Kevin scored as like the second highest ever at Gonzaga or something like that, right?
Yeah, I was one question off from a perfect score, and I think that's exactly what Shay Logan, Dr. Logan, I should say, if I'm being
Yes,
proper.
Dr. Logan.
In case he watches this, I know he's Dr. Logan. But he and I scored the same score, and it blew me away because I always looked at him like some kind of crazy genius, and it turned out that I guess I was similar in math intelligence, sort of, kind of, as him. It was a strange thing. I still look at him like he's some kind of crazy genius, because he is, and I still don't look at myself as on the level with him. But that was extremely validating for me as someone that always kind of thought I was smart but never really had any evidence for that.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm sure. And then you said that one of the professors talked to you after that and kind of encouraged you to go to grad school. I'm curious if that kind of had an effect years later on your choice to go to grad school.
I wouldn't have gone if it wasn't for my advisor and one of my professors. So Dr. Mackenzie, who was at the time the head of the math department at Gonzaga. I think it was the head of the department was a thing that they passed around.
Yeah.
But at the time, Dr. Mack was the head of the department, and he was my advisor. I never had a class with him. So all he knew about me was that I didn't go to class and I didn't get great grades, but I really cared about hanging out in the math department all the time. So I had probably about a B average in college. I mean, I think my math specific GPA was about like a 3.4 maybe, but my general GPA was like a 3.0, because I didn't put a lot of effort into it. I enjoyed, or maybe it's backwards. Maybe it was 3.4 in general, but I don't know. But I didn't necessarily put a lot of effort into it and dealing with the health issues I did. So all Dr. Mack knew about me was that I was a troublemaker that, liked math for some reason. And so when we took the exam, he called me into his office and he brought me into his office and he was like, "Hey, so how do you think you do on the exam?" And I was like, I think I did fine. I didn't really see any questions on there that completely stumped me. So I feel like I was fine. And he was like, "So are you planning on going to grad school?" And I was like, I thought that was for like really smart people. I don't know why I would go. And he just looks at me, he just goes from this like smiling demeanor to this like looking at me like I'm out of left field. Like, what the hell are you talking about? And then he goes, "Well, you really should think about it." And he shows me my score. And I was like, "What's this out of?" And I see 195. And I'm like, "What's this out of?" He's like, 200. And I'm like, "Okay, sweet."
You're like, "That's pretty good."
I thought I did well. I didn't think I did that well. So he was really impressed by me. And that was cool because Dr. Mack is brilliant. I mean, you remember Dr. Mack, he's an absolute incredible thinker. And I remember Dr. Vanderbeek was the other one that kind of pulled me aside and told me to go to grad school. He was a big kind of champion of mine in the few classes that I had with him, but he was one of the kind of three professors that really pushed me as hard as he could to be better than I was. And I should also give a special call out to my very favorite professor I've ever had in my life, John Villalpando, Dr. V.
Oh yeah, Dr. V was awesome.
Because he was the only professor I've ever had in any subject ever that would grade me harder than everyone else and would tell me about it. Like, he would tell me all the time. I would be like, "What? I have the same answers they do, and you marked me wrong and them right." And he was like, "Yeah,
So
but I expect better out of you."
Tell you. I wonder if he'll ever watch this video. But the only B that I ever got in a math class from high school all the way through the end of college was in Dr. V's Abstract Algebra 2 class. That was
really?
my 1B.
Oh, he punishes you, man. He's evil.
He does. It was brutal. I remember like I took that final, and I think I was doing decent in the class up to the final. That was a freaking hard final. I remember just dying in that, and I think it just killed me. It totally killed my grade. I mean, a B is still good, but I think I did horrible on the final because I think I had an A going into it.
He enjoyed kicking people's butts that he knew were smart.
Yeah.
And that's one of those situations where I love a professor like that because they push you. They make you work so hard for the grade that you earn, right?
Yes.
And if they see something special in you, if they believe you're smarter than you think you are, they're going to force you to recognize it. And he was one of those like big kind of components to me recognizing that maybe I was smarter than I was ever giving myself credit for.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. Like I like that. I mean, it's because the thing is, you can have like an inflated grade almost by you could have two linear algebra classes that are taught by two different people, and you could have someone extremely smart in one class, you know, that's getting a C, and someone that's maybe not as smart getting an A in the other class, just based on like the standards of the way the class is taught. So
yeah, and I remember in operations research, I would skip steps in like matrix algebra parts of those problems, and because I would skip steps and I would just say, you know what happens here, basically, he would mark me off, and I would just get I didn't have room, and he would be like, I don't care, staple it together. Curses. But no, I think that was those three guys were kind of the big reasons I kind of decided to go to grad school eventually. And
that's
as a matter of
awesome.
fact, before I made that decision, I had stopped back in Spokane and kind of made sure to go see those guys because, you know, at the time, the professors, you know, especially in the summer, would show up at, you know, a local haunt and you know, hang out and eat and drink beverages.
That's awesome.
You know, because I knew about that, I would stop by whenever I was in town to try to catch them. And they all kind of gave me the, yeah, you should go to grad school. You're dumb if you don't. And I would be like, all right, sounds good. And that's
All right, I'll do it.
and so that was one of the other big kickers for me.
So then you ended up going to University of Florida. What motivated that decision? Because that's like a top school for statistics, and was that a school where it required the subject GRE for math? Did you end up doing that? Like, how did, you know, when you got in, were you excited? Like, what was it that made you go to Florida?
I would be lying if I told you it was the weather. So it is hot down there. No, so most
Close to the beach?
it's not. It's in the middle of the swamp.
Oh, is it? Okay, it's not
Yeah.
close to the beach.
No, UF is kind of right smack dab in the middle of the state, in the middle of the swamp, and it's so hot and just humid. And oh,
Wow.
I'm a Northwestern boy. I'm not made for hot weather.
Yeah.
Um, but so when I
You know what's
applied,
funny? I've been living in the Southwest for a while now, and I'm realizing like I'm a Northwest guy too. Like I like it when it gets cold. I
it's
mean,
the
don't get
best.
me wrong, I like the sun, but when it gets too hot, I'm just like, nope, I don't like it.
I'm a t-shirt and jeans guy. Anytime I can't wear jeans, I feel naked. So if I have to wear shorts, it's uncomfortable for me. Um, but so when I applied, like I said, I applied to a bunch of schools, and kind of my plan was I would go to the best school that gave me full funding. Um, for most of the programs I applied for, most of the programs I applied for were stats, and most of them didn't require a subject GRE to get in for the stats program.
Yep.
Don't know why, but that's just how it was. So a majority of the schools didn't require it, but I also wanted to apply to a couple math programs because I thought maybe I could go into graph theory because I don't know if you remember in college we did a Shay Logan, Dr. Logan. I'll get that right.
Shay's
And
gonna be watching this.
right, myself and somebody else did a presentation on some graph theory that we made up when we were playing Risk one day.
Oh, did you present that in one of our classes?
Yeah, and we did it in the senior the consulting class or whatever it was
The
called.
comprehensive thing? Yeah.
Yeah, and we also
Yeah, no, I think I remember that.
we presented on it in a optimization conference that was held at Gonzaga as well.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool.
yeah, so I loved graph theory. I did really good in that class. Shout outs to Dr. Overbay if she's watching. Um,
And you
and
and I were in the same graph theory class, I believe.
yeah, that was a
Yep.
fun class. That was a
Yeah,
lot
that
of
was.
fun. God, we're nerds, but that was a lot of fun.
We really are.
But so the schools,
That really was a fun class. I was looking back at some of my old stuff, and I actually still have a couple exams. After you and I were talking the other day, I dug through this box. I have some of my old exams from Overbay's class, and I'm like, man, this is crazy. Looking at some of this, it was a fun class.
yeah, the problems were always challenging in a fun way, and I think I liked that. And you know, the combinatorics part of that kind of also was, you know, big in probability theory, which I had taken around the same time, and so
Yep.
there was a lot of things to enjoy about that. So I didn't get into any of the math programs for the graph theory studying. because my subject GRE, while I might have done well, it wasn't the best I could have done. And so that path was that door was closed for me for the meantime. But for the stats programs, I got into Georgia, but I had applied too late, so they couldn't fund me. I got into George Washington. They could fund me partially first semester and fully second semester. I got into Florida with full funding. I got into Texas, Austin, I believe, with partial funding first semester, because that's just how they did it with most of their students. And I think there was one other that I got in with full funding. But out of all the schools I got into, Florida was the top ranked at the time for stats. U.S. News and World Report ranking for grad schools.
And you said they were like number 7, right?
They were really high. They were in the top 10 in the country. And I was like, wow, why are these fools letting me in? I'm going to go here.
Well, that's awesome.
And so that's kind of how I ended up there. For me, it wasn't about location. It wasn't about anything other than I want to go to the top program. I had been told by several professors that where you get your undergrad degree doesn't matter. It's where you get that grad school degree that does matter. And so that's where I just kind of decided less on location and more on quality of program.
So then once you actually moved to Florida, got there, give us an idea of, because I really want to get to your work after grad school too, but give us an idea of what your daily life kind of looked like and what, were you teaching? Were you taking classes?
Yes.
How much per week were you working?
A lot. The thing that I learned in grad school is bury your ego very quickly. The second thing I learned at grad school is counseling is free for grad students. The third thing I learned in grad school is that all it takes is hard work and dedication.
Yeah.
It's not about who's the smartest in grad school. They want to push you as hard as they can to prove that you're willing to put in the work to do grad school.
Yes.
So it's 3 classes a semester at Florida. It was the first year was pretty well laid out for you. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to take an elective. The second year, there was a lot of opportunity for electives, which was great. The second year, I had a blast, especially after I kind of decided to only get my master's. But a typical week, you teach, with what we were doing, it would be an intro to stats lab where you do kind of hands-on intro to stats teaching, kind of like testing out what they're learning in class the week before with hands-on experiments so they can see how it works in small samples.
Yep.
So that would be 4 hours a week. There would also be 4 or more hours a week in the tutoring lab where you have to be there for, any students in the intro to stats class who have a question. Then there would be, doing homework. Then there would be, studying, because if you're not studying in grad school at every given moment, you're doing it wrong, because you never know when there's a test or an exam right around the corner, and you just need to be ready to, not have to cram the night before.
Yeah.
So on an average week, I probably spent about 60 hours a week working. By the kind of time where I was preparing to take the first year exam to determine if you're on the PhD or master's track, that was closer to 80 hours. On the worst weeks, you're working almost 100 hours a week, just in homework and studying and teaching and preparing. And not to mention, every graduate student should grad the graduate union, because that's really important to help make sure that grad students can get health care, to make sure that grad students can get paid for doing what they're doing for the university for necessarily free.
Yep.
So, adding those meetings and things like that, it adds up quick, and there's not a lot of time for sleeping, not a lot of time for socializing.
So when you when you taught your first class, what class, or actually throughout the 2 years, like what classes did you teach while you were there?
I only taught the intro to stats class because that's where they needed the most help.
Okay.
There was opportunities to be research assistants or to help out in other classes, but those were few and far between and reserved for the students that showed a keen interest in wanting to teach.
So teaching the intro to stats class, like your first time walking into class, give us an idea of, were you nervous? Was it a strange experience suddenly being in front of everyone teaching? How did you prepare for that?
The bad answer is I didn't really. I've always been comfortable in front of groups, which is strange because I'm very uncomfortable talking to people like face to face, but I'm great in front of a crowd.
Well, we're
So
kind of talking face to face right now, and you're doing just fine.
there's a computer there. I can see it.
Yeah, well, that's true.
No, so I went in. I gave the same introduction every class that I taught. I'm Kevin or Murph or Sir Murph if you're not into that whole brevity thing, because I really like to think of myself as a Lebowski. Um, but
Do you
no,
still go by Murph, by the way? Because I still sometimes call you Murph.
I just let people call me what they want.
Okay, there you
I
go.
don't care enough. But so yeah, no, I went into class and I told them, very clearly that, hey, this is college. I'm not here to baby you, and I'm not here to make sure you get a perfect score, but I'm here to help, and I'm really happy to help. If you ask questions, I'll be there to help you out. If you pay attention, this is not supposed to be, that class was not supposed to be something that killed their grade. It's really there to be a grade booster. And I told them all very clearly, like, if you're paying attention, the answer will be said out loud for every one of the problems on this worksheet that you have to fill out. But you have to pay attention, and I'm not going to repeat myself. So as long as you're paying attention, as long as you're engaged, you're going to get a perfect score on every one of these papers, and this will only boost your grade. If you're not, you're only punishing yourself. I plan on treating you guys all like adults, so act like one, and we're all good. And for the most part, I didn't have any problem students. I never once had to kick a kid out of my class, which was dope.
That's nice.
Yeah. Um, it was, I tried to foster that same environment that we had at Gonzaga, because at a big school, when there's hundreds of students, they tend not to have that environment. So I tried to keep it very casual yet educational.
Did you feel like when you went in, did you feel prepared to teach it, or did you have to do much review of intro stats in order to teach it? Like, did they give you a book and you're like, okay, I need to figure out how I'm going to do the lessons, or did they have any lessons planned out for you?
Yeah, so they gave you the book, and the worksheet schedule was fairly consistent. So I knew at least what I was gonna likely have to do, depending on what week it was and what have you. But I never really felt like I had to review that stuff because I knew it so well.
Yeah.
That sounds cocky, but the subject was not the concern I had. The getting it through and teaching it was the concern.
Yep.
So I often would meet with a couple of friends of mine, who were very, very high quality educators. That are now, actually, one of them is a professor, no, a instructor for a stats instructor at another university somewhere. I'd have to ask her. She knows better than I do. Um, but we would talk about how we would teach a certain concept. And one of those things that I think makes me a valuable employee is, especially at this point in my career, is that I've always been pretty good at breaking down difficult concepts for people that may not have that same knowledge or experience that I have.
Yep.
And so, that's a skill that I really honed in grad school that I learned in college. And I think that's just something that you kind of learn to do if you are willing to try.
Totally. No, I think that's awesome. I think this is actually a good segue into kind of your career after stats, because I'm sure that the teaching experience probably actually helped you. I would guess, I would venture to say, maybe not, maybe this is not true, but it may have helped you even more than some of the stats itself, because I feel like in the work world, I know we talked about this a little bit, but so much of it is about communication. And obviously, like the type of jobs that you and I are in, there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of figuring out you have to do, which is good to have a math stats background. But I feel like so much of the challenge is communicating it, and you're a really good communicator. So kind of speak to how tutoring and teaching and that whole experience has helped you in your career.
Yeah, so it wasn't, all aces from the first job, right? So after grad school, I went home and I helped out around my folks' house a bit because my mom was recovering from cancer, and family's a big thing to me, and
Yes.
I know it is to a lot of my friends, but for me, it was important to me to help her out. She was diagnosed when I was in grad school, and she was on the kind of healthy end as I was out, but I wanted to make sure to help her out, and so my dad could be more focused on work, and just to be there to help. So I took a little bit of time off, and then I eventually found a job working at a local cruise line, Holland America line. That was an interesting first challenge as an employee, as a working professional.
I remember you telling me that. Is that in Seattle or was that in Florida?
Yeah, that's in Seattle. So
Okay. Yeah.
they're a Seattle cruise line. They're like more of a luxury cruise line.
Yeah.
They do a lot of like Seattle to Alaska cruises. They do a lot of, they do a lot of cruises all over the world, but kind of they're most famous for their Seattle to Alaska cruises. And the challenge there was that they hired me to help influence them into making data-based decisions at the time. Unfortunately, it was an uphill battle for me. That's not to speak ill of anything about the company or any of the employees, but cruise lines have historically been run off of experiential knowledge. If you work on the ship, it's a different world on the ship. And anybody that had worked on the ship would say, you don't know what it's like trying to work on the ship unless you've already, or you don't know what it's like and what people will agree to on the ship unless you've worked on the ship.
Right.
How many times can I say ship? And one of the battles I faced was I had never been on a cruise at that point in my life. I have no idea what it's like, but the kind of position I always took is I appreciate what they were saying, but I would be willing to bet that I know data better than they know life on a ship.
Right.
And I could always take that position because I've been a math nerd my whole life since I was a little kid, entering baseball stats into a spreadsheet. I'd been doing that since I was like 5, 6, 7, years old, memorizing numbers and playing with data and doing things. And, that life experience, that experience in my life allowed me to take that position. Now, I've learned in my life that that's probably not the best position to take because it was a relatively combative position. I had struggles at that company because of I was so cocky coming out of grad school. And it ended up kind of getting me this little bit of hard-headedness at that company that was well known. So eventually I ended up leaving that job due to my health reasons, kind of cropped back up. My back got worse one day. I can't even remember what I was doing. Oh, I was at the gym one day and I did a burpee and I was in a squat and all of a sudden I couldn't stand and ended up on the ground and was barely able to get myself out of there. And so, because of
and burpees are tough too, especially like if you have back pain in the middle of a burpee, that's not good.
no. And so, because of my health, I was unable to continue working for them. Holland America is a very traditional company, as I kind of already mentioned, and they didn't really have a program to help you work from home. And I didn't feel like I could be effective and continue to do good work as a result of that. And so I ended up deciding that my health should be more important to me. And I left that job without anything else lined up, which, oh boy, that was a mistake.
And this would have been what, 2014, 2015 maybe, or
let's see.
16?
I graduated. Hang on. I can pull up my resume and tell you the actual numbers.
Oh, you don't have to get the exact, but I was like, I think because you said you went 2012 was when you went to grad school. So I'm assuming you graduated in like 14, 15.
Yeah. So oops, that's the wrong thing. So I graduated. I did grad school in, let's see. There it is. I graduated with my master in 2013. So I was working at Holland America from 2014 to 2015.
Okay. Nice.
Benefits of a second monitor. I can't remember dates, man.
That's
Where
perfect.
I
Yeah, no, I know how that is.
I still don't know my dad's birthday to this day, and I'm 30 something.
I know like the general, like I know the week of everyone in my family, and then I'm always like, wait, is it the 10th or the 12th? I always get that kind of stuff confused.
Great with numbers, bad with dates and names.
Exactly.
But so I ended up leaving without another job, and because of my health, I was pretty much bedridden for a while. So I didn't have a job for some time, and some time turned into a year, which turned into almost 2 years. But eventually, I decided things weren't happening for me, so I decided to make things happen. I ended up getting a job tutoring again at an incredible learning center in Woodinville, Washington, which is where I went to high school.
Nice.
And I worked at the Dolan Learning Center in Woodinville. It was there that I was able to kind of rebuild confidence in myself and my abilities. I taught math and physics to high school kids, and I taught math and kind of general skills to a couple of younger kids with some learning disabilities. And that wasn't quite making ends meet. So I went to Seattle Startup Week, which is an annual event for all the startups in Seattle, which there are many.
Yep.
And I did some networking there and then went to the career fair. And at the career fair, the fact that I'm a sports nerd and love sports stats finally paid off for me. I had done a presentation for my master's project. So at Florida, when you're going to get your master's, they make you study a paper, present the results, be able to teach it to 3 of the professors, and if possible, recreate the results if the data is not proprietary. The data I was getting, the data set they had was proprietary, and it was going to be too much of a data scraping project for me to try to put it together. So they let me off the hook for that part. But I did have to explain a logistic regression Monte Carlo method of analyzing the NCAA tournament.
That's awesome.
It was a paper written by some dudes, I believe, in the agricultural sciences at Georgia Tech. Apparently they were bored one day. But it's to this day the best I've seen at predicting each individual NCAA tournament game. And the only input data is the margin of victory and whether the game was home or away for each team.
Interesting.
It's awesome. I'll send you the link so you can post it in the comments of this video.
Yeah, send me I'll definitely post it.
But it is a wonderful paper. They've since refined the model to make it a Bayesian model, which is even better. But I had that on my resume because it was a presentation that I had done. And someone once told me that every presentation you've ever done that's not for a specific class, you should write down as a presentation in your resume because it helps speak to your ability to present.
Yep.
Which is a huge thing. So I went to a company's table called FanWide, FANWIDE, www.fanwide.com, and gave them my resume and said, hey, I'm looking for a data job. And they gave me an opportunity to interview. It was a working interview. I had to do a research project. I had to do a data analysis project. But needless to say, I impressed them with the lengths I was willing to go to get this job. I was pretty desperate at the time, but I also was interested in what they're doing and really believed in what they were doing and still do. They're a great company. I loved working there. And they were able to hire me part-time at first as a data analyst. And that was the job that I'm so grateful for grad school. And what I mean by that is when you're working for a startup, it's all about the grind. It's not easy working for a startup. Money, like startup funding, especially in phase 1 funding, is inconsistent. So there are some times when, the paycheck might be late or they would ask for volunteers to hold off on getting paid. But that's pretty consistent amongst most startup life. The part that I loved about it, though, was just that I was allowed to work as much as I wanted to work or as much as there was work for me to do. So I would push late into the night just trying to get projects done. Anything they asked or they needed somebody to be able to answer, I would find a way to answer that question. The role was a data analyst, but I was way more of a data analyst / researcher / data entry / anything else they could ask for.
That's awesome. So you got a ton of good experience there.
Yeah, it was so much fun. And that, those kind of crazy hours were, helpful because of grad school. And because I wasn't able to be full-time, I ended up picking up a third job at the time. So I was tutoring and working at FanWide. And then I also worked at a comic book shop every, a couple days a week. And those 3 things allowed me to kind of be comfortable money-wise and allowed me to kind of continue to pursue FanWide even when, it became when the money things were a complication for whatever reason. Whether there wasn't the work for me that specific month or whether there was, any issues whatsoever, I was able to make ends meet no matter what the money situation was at the startup. So, and they're doing really awesome stuff over there. I'm not even going to lie to you. Most of it I can't talk about publicly because it's dope stuff, but
I believe it.
But they're doing some really cool things over there.
Yeah, I feel like when you think of a statistician, kind of one of the dream jobs is being a sports statistician. Now, I'm sure like there's a lot of glamour around that name, and I'm sure there's a lot more grind in the job itself. But when you kind of hear that, I always think of sports as being kind of the dream job there.
There's a lot of sports nerds, and one of the biggest problems in even wanting to pursue that is that all the data is now proprietary because it's all
Yeah.
these advanced things. And so even going to Sloan, the sports analytics conference, you're not even sitting there and watching the presentations. All that data is hidden behind, proprietary labels, so you can't even see it anymore. And so as a result, it's become this very like closed off segment of the population that is in the sports stats world, and everybody else is just trying to get their foot in the door. And
I
it's
kind of wonder if because it feels like it's that way in a lot of industries. And I mean, I know we've had an explosion in the last decade, 20 years to the last decade of data. And data is such a big thing at companies now. And I feel like so much of the strategy and secretive type work involves data, really, for like a lot of the decisions that are made. So I feel like so much is proprietary. I mean, at companies I've worked at, I've worked at health companies, so it makes sense that a lot of it's more proprietary, especially because you're dealing with people's health records. So you can't, I mean, that in and of itself makes it secretive. But even like when it's de-identified and everything, a lot of times there will be, it's proprietary. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and so it's crazy to me because it's especially most stats people, especially in the sports world, used to be big sharers, right? Like the sabermetrics world was a bunch of dudes that would share their models and be like, oh, I can improve on this, and then send it back and not take any credit for it and things like
Right.
that. And like the fantasy baseball guys that really created a lot of the crazy stuff, it was all just public knowledge that they just shared. It wasn't a ton of like published proprietary papers. That's relatively new from my experience and something that I don't necessarily love. Um,
Interesting.
but after FanWide, when I needed a little more stability in my life, the startup life was a little too chaotic, and I still worked at FanWide part time, but I took a contract. I took a contract role at Starbucks as a data analyst, knowing that if I wanted to kind of get to where I wanted to be in my career, I needed to have um, some quality experience, but basically I needed to have a big name on my resume.
Yep.
Every
And you worked
recruiter,
on the Starbucks app.
yeah, every recruiter I worked with in Seattle told me I needed a big name on my on my resume, and so I was able to find this uh, data analyst job at Starbucks where I was on the mobile. I can't remember the name of the team. That's bad of me, but it was mobile marketing basically. Um, I was part of the team that generated the lists for any of the ads that would be pushed to your cell phone or that would be emailed to you. And so anytime we needed a list made manually based on specific criteria that the decision scientists had come up with, I was the guy that pulled those. I also got to do some really cool one-off data pulls that were, like for, studies and things like that. But for the most part, my job was relatively samey from week to week, which drove me nuts. It was a great job with great experience that kind of taught me how to interact with people at a professional level. The skills that I didn't have at Holland America line, I learned at Starbucks. And that was incredibly beneficial to me in my career.
I believe it.
But that was a contract role. And that's a dirty word to me because contractors they're undervalued, underpaid, and overworked.
100%. Yeah. And no benefits.
Yeah. And the issue that I take with it isn't that I was making less money than I deserve. No, I don't care. Whatever. I could make
Yeah.
ends meet. I could eat food. I could travel a little bit here and there. What drives me nuts is just the relative insane decision process that goes into hiring contractors.
Right.
It's less efficient than just hiring somebody that has great knowledge of the data that will be there forever.
Totally. You and I talked about this a little bit.
Yeah. And so I, I kind of started looking as I saw my contract nearing the end and was able to find this wonderful job that I have now at a marketing firm called Catalysis. It's a small company in Seattle, but they do really good work there. And I had tried to get a job there before I took the Starbucks gig, but couldn't necessarily justify my. I didn't think I was ready for it yet, I think is the right way to say it. And since I've started there, it's this wonderful opportunity to constantly work on several different projects and constantly be doing different types of things. You know, I do some QA work, I do data modeling.
And this is really a data-driven marketing type company, right?
Yeah. We recently did this really awesome data model that I mentioned to you that I can't talk about too much.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But we kind of really had to innovate our modeling process to fit a real world application, something that no grad school, no undergraduate school ever prepared me for, was the fact that you never get clean data in practice. And so creating a model from messy data, creating a model that uses that messy data, that's imbalanced messy data,
Yep.
and creating a model that will function for what the client wants using this imbalanced messy data is one of the most fun experiences you get to have as a data analyst slash data scientist slash statistician. You know, they're all kind of like a hierarchy. You know, the data analyst is the lowest, data scientist is a little bit higher, and then statistician is the kind of the peak of that
Yep.
kind of career tree, if you will. And my favorite experience in my professional life is using that experience from grad school to kind of you create a modeling scenario, using that experience from FanWide to kind of figure it out on the fly on how to make it work, and then using that experience from, you know, grad school and tutoring to present this to the client in a way that she can understand it or he can understand it, even if they don't have a statistics type background.
That's awesome.
And so it's this kind of like, I went that long into the whole career experience to kind of show you how it all just kind of funnels to where you are in a career. It kind of, all those skills that you pick up and you don't know how they're useful, all of a sudden.
Yeah, see, I find that fascinating because like sometimes I, look back on my life and I'm like, how did I get good at this one thing? And then you think back to small things in life. It's like, oh yeah, I was a tutor, or oh yeah, I worked on this a long time ago. It didn't seem important at the time, but it built up a skill that could be extremely helpful that you wouldn't have thought,
Yeah. And I've, at this job, I've been told I'm wonderful to work with, which was a big feather in my cap.
Well,
Because
I mean, you start Nerf wars at the office, so you have to be.
right, that's the best. Small companies are the best, just like small schools are the best. They're just good times.
Exactly.
No, but it's this opportunity to kind of use all these skills and put them together and be working in a field that I've been trying to get to since I started my career. This one job where I could use my maths to answer questions. That's all I want to do. Like, I don't want to teach. I don't want to be asked. I don't want to be asking questions. I want to be answering questions. If I could be a professional student, I would, but that's not a thing. And so I had to find a job that would allow me to answer questions for a living. And that's what I love about it.
That's awesome. So would you say of all the jobs that you've had, this is your favorite so far?
I think this is my favorite only because it's the most challenging and the most consistently difficult, but still very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very fulfilling. Um, you know, I use this analogy when I spoke to my friend's class. I have a friend that's a math and computer science high school teacher, and he asked me to speak to his class, and they were like, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "So I solve data problems." And they're asking, "Well, how do you do that?" And I'm like, "Well, you write SQL code to get the data out of the warehouse, then you model it, and then you present it." They're like, "What's SQL?" Or what is that like? And I always just say, "Have you guys ever seen one of them old detective shows where there's strings tied to walls with pictures in the middle?" That's what writing SQL's code is like. You have to study the tables, figure out how to join them the right way, then start over because you did it wrong. And then eventually you get to this data set. And then when you get to that data set, that's when the investigation starts. That's when you try to convict that criminal, that data.
That's a great way to describe it with the strings.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that analogy. I gave an analogy one time. Actually, I think I said it on one of my other YouTube videos. Is I don't know if you feel this way, but for me, with being an actuary, and I'm guessing it's probably similar for you, almost like it's kind of like painting. When you paint a house, 80% of your work is spent on the prep, like taping the walls, cleaning and all that, and 20% is spent on the actual painting, which is what your goal was. And similar in the actuarial world, even though like we're trained to do the modeling and to do the cool stuff, 80% of our time is spent on cleaning, writing the SQL, writing the code, pulling the data, cleaning up the data, getting it to a point where we actually can model it and doing the QC checks on it. So I feel like it's an 80-20 thing. Would you say it's similar for you?
At best, it's 20%, right? Like so much of my time at every job I've had is figuring out how to get the data that I want. It shouldn't take, like, I feel like these are smart companies. Like, it shouldn't be hard for, like the big companies of the world to have a clean data set, but for some reason it's so darn difficult.
You would think, but it's just every company I've been at, it always amazes me.
Yeah, well, me too. And that's like, it's one of those things that I actually was talking to my boss about this, I think 2 days ago, that nobody at any of the companies that we work for at Catalysis has thought about the best ways to take data in, right? Like we do have a couple of bigger clients that, have really clean data sets, and that's dope. But for the most part, like, they don't think about the right way to gather data, right?
Totally.
Something as simple as locking down the state field to only be the states in the country that you've selected is not done. Like, or locking down the country field so it's only the countries that are on the world and not something like, like I've seen data where the country is a string of just random letters spit out.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so this is a free form field.
Yeah, it's like you get test records in there, you get other just random things that pop up.
Yeah. And so it, like, a big majority of my time is checking to see if the code is right, or checking the QA to make sure that our data warehouse engineers have developed the data cube in the right way so that, certain things are attributed properly.
Totally.
And that's a large majority of what I've done at every job. And that's not a complaint. That's just I never expected that.
I felt the same way. I was shocked at, like, because I mean, all the companies I've worked at are pretty large companies, and it's like, wow. I mean, it just speaks to we've come so far, but we still have a long ways to go with a lot of these a lot of this technology. So
well, and the modeling part is usually the easiest part.
Yeah.
Now, the project that I just presented on last week, we had to restart, and I had to make a tough call on that because we had a really good model and it made a lot of sense, but the goal of that project was to create marketing segments, and we created one marketing segment that had like 95% of customers, and then 4 marketing segments that had like the other 5%. And it created this issue of, well, we can't sell this. So if we can't sell this, then we have to consider where we started and figure out how we can get to a divergent path.
Yes.
And that's where that second part of the analogy comes in. It's the interrogation, right? When you're building the model, it's like the interrogation, after you've solved the case with the strings, now you have to interrogate the suspect and get him to confess.
Exactly.
Right. So you have this data in front of you and you're trying to build the model to get the data to confess to you what it truly is. And that sometimes that can go really fast. And most of the time it is pretty fast. But then there's those times where that suspect is just hard-headed. You have to play good cop, bad cop. You have to, turn up the heat in the room, and then you have to point the thing and yell at them and where were you? And
totally.
Sometimes you have to bring in Batman. This analogy is falling
bringing
apart
Batman
quickly.
is the best.
Yeah. I watched The Dark Knight the other day. It's on Netflix.
Okay, there you go.
But in reality, that's the part that it isn't the hardest part, but it is it isn't the most time-consuming part, but it is the intellectually most difficult part, because you have to try to solve a problem, try to make sure you understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then come up with a creative way to solve it once you realize that the textbook way to solve this problem isn't going to function. And that's the innovation that I love. I think that's the part that draws a lot of our peers into academia. It's that trying to solve research problems. But for me, I think the difference between the kind of private sector and academia is that in academia, you can spend years doing the same research I have deadlines. I have another project that's coming down the pipe that I have a deadline on that's shortly thereafter. It's innovating in a small amount of time, doing the best you can, and then moving on and never thinking about it again.
Yep.
And that's awesome. Like, it's so much fun.
Exactly. No, that it's true. There is in the business world, even in my area, there's constant change, and you're constantly learning new things or doing new things, which can be really exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting to the top of the hour. We're already at the top of the hour here. So I'm going to ask you the last two questions, which are completely unrelated to statistics, but I always like to ask my guests fun questions at the end. So the first one for you is, you have an epic beard. How much longer are you going to let that thing grow out? Because it is amazing.
I think it's amazing too, but at first I didn't love it, but it really grew on me. Nailed it. All right. So, I don't know, man. It's just kind of happened. My partner, she loves me with a beard, and so I started growing it one day, and then sometime last year, a little more than a year and a month ago, I decided to see how long I could let it go, and it's gotten pretty long.
It's long. How long has that been?
It's about a year and a month.
Okay.
I've gotten it trimmed a few times, but she's French braided it down the side a couple times.
That's amazing.
But I'll probably shave it once it gets annoying.
I think the longest I've gone is like 3 or 4 months, and every winter now is kind of my thing. I need to grow a beard every winter.
Yeah, that was my thing too. It started in high school. After football season, I would always grow out a goatee back when that was a thing.
Oh, so you were like manly back then. I couldn't even grow a beard until like right around 25-ish,
I've never
25,
been manly.
26, which is crazy. Like I had whiskers kind of when I was younger, but like it was really, really sparse. And then for some reason in my mid to late 20s is when I was able to grow a beard.
I can grow facial hair. I've never been manly. Don't confuse me.
Oh, okay, there we go.
But no, I'll probably trim it down again sometime soon. It's starting to get kind of annoying. Like the thing that really drives me nuts is that in the winter, when I zip up my winter coat, it gets stuck in there, and that's rough.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll probably trim it up sometime soon.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it makes you look wise, so.
I feel wise, and it's getting gray, so I feel distinguished. That's the part I really like.
Okay, my next question for you is the best restaurant in Seattle that you've been to.
That's a good question. All right. So it depends on what you're going for. But if I'm going for breakfast food, there's this place that used to be a late night spot that's now got like multiple locations around downtown Seattle called, am I allowed to curse on this? I don't want to do it.
Yeah, you are. You're allowed to curse.
All right. So it's called Biscuit Bitch. They do amazing biscuits and gravy, and I love them. And it's this like cool little like hipster joint that like they do, all this crazy, biscuits and gravy or like other breakfast stuff, but they'll do the gravy vegan if you want it.
Nice.
Their biscuits are to die for. I'm a big biscuits and gravy guy. I love sausage gravy. Don't worry, I'm not a vegetarian, but my partner is, and I love her anyways.
Yes.
That's just a
Are
joke.
you also a chicken and waffles guy?
I am a chicken and waffles guy, yeah.
See, like most people are. I've never really liked it.
It's okay. Not everybody's perfect.
I like chicken and I like waffles, but the combo is just, yeah.
Yeah, but so biscuits and gravy I love. They do my favorite biscuits and gravy in town. But Danielle and I found a really good Indian place. I love Indian food. It's quite literally my favorite food. And I got to find the name of the place. There's this place in Pike's Place Market, which seems like the most cliche place in the whole world.
Yeah, I just think of Pike's Place Market with the guys throwing the salmon in the air.
Yeah, so the place is called, if I'm correct on this, it's called the Kasturi Grill. Kasturi Grill. I can't say it right, but it's Kastoori.
Yeah, sounds like Kastori.
Yeah, they do my favorite Indian food in town.
Nice.
I love that place. They also do this.
Indian food is really good. I haven't had it for a while, but I do like it.
They do this like cauliflower that's deep like it's fried in the name of the cooking technique. I can't remember. With like sweet and sour sauce, and it's quite literally the best thing that I've ever eaten in my entire life.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's insane.
So we've got Biscuit Bitch and Kastori something are your two
Story
best,
Grill, yeah.
two top restaurants in Seattle.
Those are my favorites. I'm not
Nice.
a foodie though, so I don't, take my opinion with a grain of salt. I just know what I like.
You like food, so that's all that matters.
Yes, sir.
Well, okay, I think we're about ready to wrap up here. So good answers. I appreciated talking to you. That was a fascinating journey, and I hope everyone watching enjoyed that. And next time on the channel, we actually have an AP chemistry teacher, so that should be interesting. And I'm out from Coronado. Kevin is out from his closet in Seattle.
Goodbye.
And thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.